In this video, we'll talk about the variables pane down here at the bottom. We've seen how we can create a variable up here in the ribbon using create variable. And when we do create those variables, they show up down here in the variables pane, which can be shown and hidden using the variables label. You'll notice that below our existing variables, there's a row here that says create variable. If I click in there, you can see that a new row has been added and it pushed my previous variables up. So to see them all, I can click on this and expand it, so now we can see everything. This variable was created as a string by default, and since we were inside this sequence, it was created with a scope of sequence. I can rename this to my string variable, or whatever you want. Notice again, I'm not using double quotes there. And if I want to, I can click here, and I can change the type of this variable to a boolean, or an int 32, or an object, or even an array of t. And if you don't know what these things are, be sure to check out my RPA Tech Primer video. So I'll select Boolean, and if I wanted to, I could click here and change the scope to one of the available scopes within my workflow. So if I select flowchart, now that variable scope is part of flowchart, and we'll talk about scope more in a future video. I could also change the default value if I want to something like true or false, since it's a Boolean. And now if I navigate back out to main, and shrink down my variables window here, you can see now we're back out here in our flowchart. So you can imagine that if I click on create variable again, and I name this my new flowchart variable, again, by default, it's created as a string, but now you can see that the scope is flowchart. So I just wanted to show you that you can use the variables pane to create new variables and to update every aspect of any given variables row. Notice, however, that if you created a variable as a string and it has a default that's a string value, of course if you change this to int 32 and move away, it's saying there's a compiler error because the tool can't convert this string value to an int 32. So it's up to you to put in some kind of an integer value to get rid of that warning. There are some other cool features about this variables pane. If you click on any one of these headers, you'll notice that you can sort the variables by any column. And eventually when you get lots of variables in here, you're going to appreciate that. Typically when you first create a variable and you go to the variables pane, you'll find that variable at the top of the list for quick and easy access. But later on when you come back and you know the name of a given variable starts with P, you're going to want to sort by name and scroll down the list until you find the P's. When you're viewing your topmost activity, and you're seeing all the variables, sometimes being able to sort by scope is handy, so you can get a visual sense for which variables are part of which activities. And you actually can't sort by default value, which is probably sensible. If you right-click on any row, you have the ability to delete a variable, and when you click on delete, it doesn't prompt you. So if it turns out that was a mistake, make sure you remember that you can use Ctrl-Z and bring that variable right back. You may also have noticed when I right-click, I can add an annotation, and that simply pops up a text window that allows me to type some interesting details that might help the user understand why this variable exists. When you click on OK, you can see this little symbol here shows up, and when you hover over it, you can see the value of that annotation. Now if you right-click again, you see that you can edit the annotation or delete the annotation. When you click Edit, you can add more information, and when you click OK and hover again, now you can see all that information. Of course, when you right-click and you delete the annotation, that goes away. That's also undoable. And believe it or not, I think that's a pretty handy feature to have, because if you're dealing with a complex automation that you didn't create, and you're debating about whether a particular variable could be updated or removed in some way, sometimes having an annotation like this can prevent a catastrophe. So the last thing I'll point out about the variable section, like I said, if you have this thing collapsed and you drill into some kind of an activity and you right-click and create a variable inside that activity, or you use this create variable mechanism here, and let's call this zMyVariable, so we know it should show up at the end of the list. When I click OK, notice that even though we don't have anything set here as a sort column, that new variable showed up right here close to the top. And UiPath does that, so when you first create a variable, it's easy to find and modify if you need to do that. Then, like I mentioned, you can use the sorting here to more easily find it in the future.